I think what would be interesting though is what's gone on the last year or two. I think we kind of seeded this a minute ago with Chronicle becoming SecOps and some of the shift that Google is making towards this new thing because we've seen acquisitions. We saw Mandiant get pulled in. They're doing some interesting things there. So if you were going to say like what are some of the changes that have happened, like what would you say?
Well, I think I want to talk about two themes when it comes to SecOps technology. One is kind of the decade that can be measured in decades theme. So the theme of the 20s, if you will. I don't know if I've ever heard anybody refer to it as the 20s. But if you go back to, let's say, the year 2000, there was a theme of putting kind of structure and meaning around everything. There was a theme around categorization and normalization, making meaning out of the data. And tools like ArcSight were doing a lot of work in that. And then they ran into scale issues, right? The data just kind of grew exponentially. The on-prem kind of hardware and software at the time couldn't deal with that. So you went from a very kind of structured theme to, hey, let's go a little bit more unstructured. Data and
Mhm.
complexity is growing. Let's just kind of grep over that, right? So let's go a little bit more unstructured. We may have some data models, but they're going to be hugely optional, et cetera, et cetera. And then you go into this decade where
Mhm.
things kind of swung back a little bit, but with scale. So maybe a very kind of data-centric view of the world. I kind of fancy myself more of a data enthusiast, but the data-centric view of the world is that things are kind of swinging back to a more structured model. And you go into kind of the more short-term theme, things with enrichment, threat intel, AI, et cetera, et cetera. There's this realization that in order to fulfill that promise of enrichment, of automation, of AI, et cetera, there's really years of kind of what I call data janitorial work that needs to be done, right? The garbage in, garbage out. The data
Right.
needs to be structured in a proper way to do that. So this kind of lends itself to that. So I think Chronicle has been following nicely, and I would hope to say ahead of the curve in these themes because it made a bet around kind of this idea of throw randomness at it and make a story out of it, which is
Right.
a data modeling problem, right? So you go into a data modeling problem, which is not as sexy as generative AI, right? Like generative AI makes a story, but through something else. Data modeling is take fields, map them, create a model, make it consistent. Not as sexy, but very tedious, very hard to do, very labor intensive. So we made
Mhm.
that investment and we kind of created this story-centric view of the sim. Then that evolved with a now what? You have this story-centric view of the sim, you have a data model, you have a story and a kind of a timeline, a chronicle, if you will. That name would never die for me. I'm sorry.
No, me either. No, me, it's forever,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, you have a chronicle, if you will, of what happened. Then we started infusing different things to it. The first part was the now what, the SOAR component. Okay, now you have a story of what happened. Well, can you backtrack that to make an automated determination, or can you backtrack that to make an automated action? So that's where the Siemplify acquisition came in, and one of the best acquisitions in my experience. They very
Sure.
rapidly integrated and kind of infused the two technologies together. And it was really a case of 1 + 1 = 11 because you had the story, but then you have kind of the power to make a decree over it, right? To make a command out of it. So SOAR was a very powerful addition, and I really love working with one of the only kind of very well integrated enterprise grade SIM source solutions in the market. But then there's the subtle themes around it, which is first was the question, what if threat intel was just a natural part of the whole machine, right? What if
Yeah.
threat intel isn't something over there, we get an alert and we see an IP and we're like, oh, magic 8 ball, is this IP bad? And then we kind of look through some of these things. But what if threat intel gets kind of moved upstream to this, right? And what are some of the wonderful things we could do with threat intel? So that's where the Mandiant acquisition starts adding a lot of value, and just kind of their beautiful threat intelligence story, the IR story, and everything else starts adding this layer of threat intel context, right, of state across the thing, not just what happened, but in what context does it happen. And then you infuse the layer of risk around it too. So you basically kind of become this threat aware, risk aware storytelling system that can take action. A lot of promise behind that. Oh, and by the way, you also have the promise of AI, which is starting to slowly materialize of like, hey, some of these things could get really kind of enhanced with AI. They could be really sped up with AI. And not only can the actions be sped up, but also your learning of how to operate with it can be sped up. Instead of knowing a complex query, you can now speak in English and the system can help you translate that, et cetera, et cetera. So I think those are kind of the major themes around that. I know, Brad, it was probably a long-winded answer, but hopefully some nuggets to pick on.
No, I love it. And I think you're spot on. I mean, data is the reason that we're doing it. Data is what we're trying to protect. It's what we're mining. It's really the whole reason for everything when it comes to like, what are you trying to secure? And I know a lot of organizations, they start with the network or they start with identity, but honestly, it all comes back to data. So I think that's a great point. And I think, you know, some of the additional acquisitions that Google has made, pulling in VirusTotal and also augmenting the capabilities within the system with that information, I honestly think that it's, you know, getting to be one of the best SecOps solutions. And I think that threat intel point is spot on.